Hey everyone, Digital Scriptorium here, and today I want to show off how to install Linux Mint 22.1 Xfce Edition, step by step from start to finish. This guide is intended as a general use case installation of the operating system. I'm going to show off system requirements, how to create the bootable media, installing the operating system, and then giving a general rundown of the operating system itself. I won't be going into specific application usage, as that is outside of the scope of my guide today. All of the links I show off I will include in the description below, so you can easily find them if need be. One disclaimer I just want to mention is a warning that this is an operating system install guide where I completely remove the previous operating system. As is with any operating system, you might run into unforeseen issues, so you have to go into this with an open mind that issues might spring up. Worst case, you can always attempt to install a different operating system back on the machine. If you do need help, I have many different Windows and Linux guides to accomplish this on my channel. Before I begin, I want to mention that if you are feeling generous to think about donating to support my channel on either Ko-Fi or Patreon, every bit goes right back in making new guides. Alright, with all that said, let's dive in. Alright, so let's talk about Linux Mint's system requirements. So on Linux Mint's website, in the facts section at least, they have 2 GB of RAM minimum, 4 GB of RAM recommended, so that should be pretty easy to hit these days. Obviously more RAM is always better, 8 GB of RAM is probably even more of a safe place to be for performance and what have you, especially if you're opening up a lot of tabs and whatnot in web browsers. And then 20 GB of disk space, 100 GB recommended. Again, this is something that should be pretty easy to attain these days. My recommendation is a solid state drive would definitely make it much peppier. However, a mechanical drive will still work. And then for the screen resolution, it just mentions 1024 by 768 resolution, and that should be very easy to attain these days, so no big deal there. So let's move on to downloading the ISO image that we need. So on Linux Mint's website, under the version that is shown, go ahead and select the download button. And then if we scroll down, since we're doing Xfce Edition in this video, we will select this version to download. One thing just to mention is that if you are wanting the Cinnamon Edition, I do have a previous video on that as well that you can click on if you prefer, which I'll have a little pop-up at this section for that. Anyhow, let's click on Xfce. Now, one thing to mention is that it does have a torrent download capability, so if you wanted to torrent it, you could click this 64-bit. One thing also to mention, a lot of people ask me if I utilize the integrity and authenticity capabilities of the checksum files, and if you want to do so, you could follow the steps in this to check if the ISO is in fact okay. However, I haven't really found a need to really check the authenticity as long as you pull from a proper source. In my case, since I'm in the US, I'm going to just select Clarkson University. And then while this downloads, let's move on to how we are going to get this ISO image to be able to boot off of a USB thumb drive. So what I like to use is Rufus. If you've never used Rufus before, it is an incredibly lightweight, very small executable that doesn't have to be installed on your machine. We can just piggyback off of just double clicking the executable and then doing all the magic that we need. So on Rufus's website, scroll down here. So about halfway down on the page, you'll find the download section. Most users are going to probably go with the standard Windows x64 version. However, there is a portable Windows 64-bit version, a Windows x86 aka 32-bit version, and then there's also a Windows on ARM 64-bit version that you could download. For most users, as I said, you're probably going to be using this one, so I'm just going to select this to download it, and then at this point we're just waiting for the Linux Mint ISO to finish downloading, and then we will continue on. Alright, now that the ISO is done downloading, let's go ahead and pop open the downloads folder. I'll just select show in folder so we get into here. We can close out of the browser. So first things first is we are going to need to plug a USB thumb drive into your machine before we continue. My recommendation is really an 8 GB thumb drive. I believe a 4 GB drive will also be fine with this because it will expand on the thumb drive. So the 2.8 gigs, like I said, is not necessarily going to be the actual size that's needed for the thumb drive. If you are looking for a recommendation into a thumb drive and you don't have one on hand, then I will have a link in the description below that you can purchase off of Amazon. It's a very inexpensive name brand thumb drive that should get the job done. So now that I've got my thumb drive plugged in, there is one more thing that we should do before we continue on. Now, unfortunately, Windows Defender has been notorious lately for pac-manning Linux operating system files as they get added onto thumb drives or CDs or anything of that matter. So what we're going to do is we're going to temporarily turn off the real-time protection. Like I said, key thing is this is temporary. So if you're still planning to use this machine, it's not going to damage anything. Ultimately, what's going to happen is you flag it to turn off temporarily, and then after either 15 minutes or after a reboot, it will automatically turn back on. So I'll show you how to do that. And the same goes for both Windows 10 and Windows 11. So if we go to Start, type in Security, and then look for Windows Security, click on this, and Virus and Threat Protection, click on that, and then Virus and Threat Protection Settings, click on Managed Settings, and then it's this top portion right here, Real-Time Protection, toggle this off. You'll get the UAC prompts like yes, and then it's going to say is currently off, and then we're going to get the pop-up in the bottom basically just saying, hey, it's turned off, FYI. Alright, next up, let's go ahead and double click on Rufus. Select yes for the UAC prompt. First things first, double check that your thumb drive actually shows up in this section. If this is blank, then the thumb drive is not being detected. There's a few things you can do to troubleshoot if your thumb drive isn't being detected. One is just pull it, plug it back in, maybe a reseat will make it happy. Another option is leave it plugged in and reboot the machine. Now, of course, if you reboot the machine, just make sure to redo the turning off of the real-time protection temporarily. And the other option is that it's not necessarily being detected in Rufus, but if you go to, say, for instance, this PC and you see the thumb drive, you can right-click on it and then select Format, and then you could format it, and sometimes that makes it happy for Rufus. One thing I should mention is that before you do anything with the thumb drive, formatting or using Rufus to format it and work the magic, make sure that if you have any data that is on the thumb drive that you back it up before you continue on with this process, because formatting erases all of the data on the thumb drive. So just an FYI. So we'll close out of this, and we can close out of the downloads folder. So with your thumb drive being detected, click on the select button and then locate where you downloaded the Linux ISO. Select that, click on open, and then leave everything as is. We'll leave all the magic up to Rufus to determine what is needed, and then select start. And then if you get the pop-up mentioning that this is a hybrid image, that's fine. Let's leave the recommended option selected, click on OK. And then it's also sometimes going to say that it needs to pull some files from the internet, and I'll just let that work its magic, so we'll click on yes. And then it's basically warning us one more time that once we continue on, it's going to format the drive and nuke any data that's on it. So once again, if you have any data on the thumb drive, back it up now before continuing on. So I don't have any data, so I will click on OK. And then at this point, let's just sit back and give it about 5 to 10 minutes and we should be good to go. Alright, if all goes well, we should see a green ready. If you get any errors or anything of that sort, first off, just double check that real-time protection is in fact turned off. Usually you can tell because the shield has the X in it down in the bottom right-hand corner. If it is in fact turned off, then I would just recommend rebooting your machine. Once again, make sure real-time protection is temporarily disabled, and then try it again. If it still fails, try to download the ISO image again just to make sure that that's not corrupted, or also maybe even try a different thumb drive just to verify that the thumb drive isn't going south on you. Since everything is happy here, we can close out of this, and then at this point plug the USB thumb drive into the machine that you want to nuke the operating system on and install Linux Mint Xfce on. Now comes the point to where we need to get the machine to actually boot off of the thumb drive. Unfortunately, my recommendation is that every make and model is different in how it will initiate the boot process from booting from a thumb drive. So my recommendation is to Google your exact make and model and figure out what the key is that you need to mash when the machine first starts up at the logo screen, or is called the post screen. Figure out what key you need to mash in order for it to boot off of the thumb drive. In my case, I already know what the key is, so I'm going to reboot the machine and then we will continue on the process. Alright, so I'm going to start mashing the special key. Alright, so you may get a screen that's somewhat similar to this. So the key thing that we're looking for is something that says USB HDD or USB hard disk drive, or it could say USB thumb drive, it could say USB virtual CD drive. Sometimes the easiest thing is to look for the manufacturer of your thumb drive. In my case, mine is a very generic one, at least for this video, so I'm just going to use my down arrow key to get us down to this spot. We'll hit enter, and then I'm just going to use the down arrow key just in case it's attempting to start by default on this. But I just wanted to show that you do have a number of options that you can choose in the GNU grub screen that you're going to see. Most users, you should be fine with the first option. Some machines, especially NVIDIA users, you may actually need to use the compatibility mode just to get it to fire up and install, and then generally it works better once it's installed. But there's also a number of different options here. For instance, memory testing. UEFI firmware settings is actually a way to get into your BIOS if you needed to adjust anything. So just an FYI on that. But anyhow, I'm going to just use the top selection, which, like I said, most people should choose. And if you have issues, then you can try the second option of the compatibility mode. So I'll hit enter, and then we'll just wait for it to pull off of the thumb drive and continue on for us. And hopefully you'll see the Linux Mint little icon. And of course, it's all completely dependent on how fast your thumb drive is and how fast the USB port is that you actually have it plugged into. So it could take a few minutes for everything to load up. Alright, so you're going to see the Linux Mint OS at this point, and this is considered the live environment, as it's called. So you could actually trial the operating system at this point. However, the performance is not exactly optimal because, of course, it's just loaded into memory and it's not on a hard drive. The other thing is that it's not going to save anything you adjust or save on the machine. So it has no persistence because nothing is actually being saved to the hard drive. So the recommendation, of course, is install it on the machine so you get the best performance and you can actually make adjustments and all that good stuff. Now, one thing I should mention before we begin is that you want to make sure that the machine is connected to the internet so that it can pull down any updates and all that good stuff that it potentially needs during the install process. My recommendation is to, if possible, plug the machine into an Ethernet cable and have a direct connection. If that's not possible, for instance, your machine's too far away, or you have a machine that just doesn't have an Ethernet port on it, and you only have wireless, then let me show you how to connect up. So on the bottom right hand corner, little Ethernet port symbol, if you left click on that, then you'll have Wi-Fi networks, and you can click on available networks, and it should show you all of the available networks that you can connect into. I will have this partially blurred out for the privacy of my neighbors. But you click on this, it will ask you the usual credential information to connect in, and then you can continue on. So now that we're connected up, double click on the Install Linux Mint icon on the desktop, wait for that to load up. We'll be met with the welcome screen, and it's going to give us the option for language selections. So change up whatever language you need to in this portion. Mine's in English, and that's perfectly fine for me, so I will click on continue. Next up is going to be the keyboard layout configurations. So once again, you would select your language or your keyboard, and then you would select the locale. One thing to mention is that there is a little spot here that you could type in to test your keyboard and make sure that the keys you want are actually being properly detected. So mine's fine, so I'm going to click on continue. And then I would recommend for the multimedia codecs to check this so that we have all of that magic embedded already. This is something you could add after the fact as well. However, since it's already here, we might as well go with it. So we'll click on continue. And then for this video, I'm not doing a dual boot scenario. I do plan to make a video that shows off some different methods on how to get Linux Mint and other flavors of Linux to dual boot off of, say, a single drive or dual drives or something of that sort. However, for the scope of this video, I'm just going to outright nuke the machine entirely, and we're going to install Linux on it, and it's going to be the only operating system. With that said, if there's any data that you need to back up on the machine, make sure you do it before you go through this process. So if you do have data that needs to be backed up, just go ahead and go down to the little LM symbol and then go up to the power button, and then you could select reboot. Don't boot off the thumb drive, get back in your operating system, back up the data, and then just rinse and repeat kind of the steps that we've gone through to get to this point in booting it and all that good stuff. So anyhow, we will use erase disk and install Linux Mint. There is the advanced features option if we click on this. One is use LVM with the new Linux Mint installation, aka Logical Volume Manager, which you can research it if it's something that you are looking into. One thing is if you do actually select it, then it does give you the option to encrypt the drive. So this would mean that the data on the drive is encrypted, so if the machine were to get stolen or something like that, then it's not as easy as just ripping the drive out and someone just plugging it into their machine and seeing all your data. However, for the sake of this video, I'm going to just leave it as is, and then we will click on Install Now, and that's basically saying that we are going to write changes to the disk. So in this case, it's going to nuke all the data and it's going to format it, and then we're going to install the operating system. So I'm going to click on Continue, and then it's going to ask us on our time zone. So you can actually click on this little map here if you wanted to select a time zone, or you can also do a search for cities, and it will generally change it to whatever time zone it is that that city is in. So I'm going to leave mine as New York. That's fine. I'll click on Continue, and then it's going to ask you for your name. So let's type this in, and then it gives you the option to change your computer's name. So I'm just going to blank this out, and we'll make it Xfce, and I'll just do 01. You can name it whatever you want. Pick a username. I'll leave digital as mine. That's fine. I'll type in a password, which is going to be very weak. My recommendation is do not make a weak password. You can click the little eyeball here, which will show what your password is. Like I said, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to do a weak one. There is the option to log in automatically. However, my recommendation is leave it on, require my password to log in. And there is the option to encrypt your home folder if you wanted to. Once again, something to research if you feel it is really necessary. However, I'm just going to leave this as is. We'll click on Continue. And then at this point, it's just waiting for everything to finish. If you want a little light entertainment besides the little slideshow that comes through here, you can also click on the little arrow, which will show kind of in terminal what is happening magic-wise. Anyhow, we will continue when this is done. Alright, if all goes well, we should see the installation complete pop-up. If you get any errors along the way, one thing you can always do is just reboot, try again. If you're still having issues, then I would recommend trying a different USB thumb drive, build up the image on that, and try that out. The other thing also is that if you remember how I mentioned there was that other selection for the compatibility mode, sometimes that compatibility mode can also resolve installation problems. So those are a few options you can go down if you have any issues. So anyhow, in this case, we can click on Restart Now unless you want to continue testing the general use of the operating system, but since you've already installed it at this point, you might as well just dive in. So we'll click Restart Now, and it's going to tell us to remove the USB thumb drive, so I'll do that now, and then hit Enter, and then we should hopefully see the LM icon as it starts to boot. Alright, now we should be at the login screen, so let's go ahead and log in, and also I mistyped my name, it looks like. And then you'll get this welcome little pop-up that you can feel free to click on Let's Go and go through all the general stuff that it goes over. However, I'm just going to uncheck the show this dialog at startup so it doesn't always keep popping up, and we'll close out of that. So at this point, the operating system is installed. If you want to continue watching, I'm going to be going over the general overview of this desktop experience. So if you want to keep watching, we will start in the bottom right hand corner and go through all the goodies and what have you. So the very bottom right hand corner is going to be your date and time. If you click on it, it will give you your calendar information that you can take a peek at. You can of course feel free to change up the months, you can change up the years, you can select days, all that good stuff. Pretty self-explanatory. To the left of that is going to be your volume settings. So this is where you can adjust your volume for your sound. And if you have a microphone attached, you can also adjust the slider for the microphone. It also has the capability of muting the mic, and you can mute your sound. There are also a few options in here for audio mixer and monitor of built-in audio analog stereo configurations that you can take a look at here for options. So if you see over on the left-hand side is the Thunderbolt, which is basically your power manager feature. There's a presentation mode, which is supposed to prevent the machine's screen from turning off and prevent the machine from going to sleep. There's also the settings, which allows you to take a look at all the different settings for Power Manager. So it starts off in the General tab, and then there's System, and then there's Display settings if you want to make your display not turn off, stuff like that. There's also a security setting that you can alter. So we'll close out of that. And then next up is going to be the Network section, which I showed off earlier. So once again, you would have your wired connection and then available networks. If you click on that, if you have wireless, it's going to show up with your wireless SSIDs, or aka access points, that you could potentially access. And there's also a whole bunch of other options in here, along with like VPN connections if you wanted to add a VPN connection. Next over is going to be this little shield icon. If we click on this, this is the Update Manager, and we can click on OK for this. And then in this case, we do actually have a new version of Update Manager. There's also the option if you wanted to select a local mirror. So if you click actually yes for this, type in your password, and if you give it a moment, then you can actually select the mirror with the highest speed option. So let's just apply this just because we can, and then click here to update the apt cache. And you could also do the same for the base Noble if you wanted to. And there's a number of other features in here like PPAs, additional repositories, authentication keys, maintenance, things you can feel free to take a peek at if you wanted to. We'll just close out of this, and let's apply the update right now. Type in your password, hit enter, and if you want to see what's happening, you click on details. There's 110 updates, but just to be safe, let's click on refresh one more time. Still 110, so let's click on install updates, so that this will patch security vulnerabilities, performance issues, stability issues, things like that before we continue on. And you can click on details if you want to see what's happening, but we'll just be patient at this point. Now it's installing the packages, and then at this point it's mentioning that a reboot is required, and so we will follow along with that. So if we go down to the LM icon in the bottom left hand corner, let's click on that, and then go up to the top right of that where you'll see the power button. Click on that and then restart. And then once it's back up, we will continue on, and we'll log back in. All right, so back in the bottom right hand corner, some things kind of swapped around. The Update Manager shield kind of moved over. So let's click on the little clipboard with the exclamation. And this brings up system reports. So you can set up a system restore utility if you wanted to. There's system information, crash reports, stuff like that you can take a peek at. We'll close out of that. And then we already went over the shield. So the little bell icon is your notifications. So if we click on this, and if there were any notifications queued up, then they would show up in here. You can clear the log, you can mark all as red. There's a notification settings option. And then at the top is also the do not disturb option that you can turn on, and it puts a slash through the bell for you. I'll just turn that off for right now. And then over on the left-hand side, on the LM icon for applications, this is going to be basically your Linux Mint variant of the start menu. So at the top is going to be your account name. Whether or not it's misspelled or not, it will show up here. And then there is the settings option. There's the lock screen option, and then your power options with log out and all that good stuff. So we can click just to show it again. So there's log out, there's restart, there's shutdown, suspend, switch user, and then you can also do a save session for future logins. And I believe what this does is if you have a bunch of applications open and you check that, then the next time you log in as your user account, it will relaunch those applications. So we'll click cancel for right now. So back to the applications option. So there's favorites. So this would be anything that you favorite for applications. By default, it gives you a few kind of most utilized apps that you could see. And then there's recently used. If we actually had any applications that we opened, they would show up in here. There's all applications, which is literally going to show you every single application that is on this machine. accessories. So this is where it starts filtering things into categories. So accessories is going to give you all of your accessory applications, graphics, internet, and if you install the different browser in this, then it would show up in here if you don't prefer Firefox. Multimedia is going to give you your sound and video options. Office comes with LibreOffice Suite for you. There's the settings option, so there's a whole slew of settings that you can take a peek at here, which we'll go into a little more detail on in a little bit. And then there is system, so this is just your general system applications that you can take a peek at, like Task Manager, Xfce Terminal, stuff like that. And then one thing also to mention is that there is a search bar down at the bottom. So if you want to search for an application, for instance, terminal, then you can type terminal and it will give you your terminal options here. So next over to the right is going to be your minimize all open windows and show the desktop. So for instance, if I had, we'll just open Firefox. And let's say that I wanted to see the desktop, then I can click that to show the desktop. However, it does not close out of the applications, but if you click it again, it will restore all the applications that were open. Now with that said, to the right is Firefox. So this is your general use browser, and we can just do a basic setup of this right now. Actually have anything to import from a previous browser, you could leave this checked and save and continue, and it will pop up with a bunch of options and what have you. I'm going to uncheck it and click save and continue. You can personalize your Firefox to where you can explore recommended extensions. I'm just going to scroll down, click skip this step, and then the option to sync your data across devices. I'm just going to click on start browsing. So just as I mentioned, this is your general use browser to do whatever you like in. So I'm not going to go over all the features and whatnot within Firefox, but feel free to explore. I'll close out of this for right now. And then next over on the right is going to be your terminal. So if you need to run any terminal commands, you can do so here, and we'll close out of that. And then next over is the Thunar file manager. So this is basically your Explorer, and usually it opens to the last place that you last selected in here. So starting at the top, there's computer. So this is going to show you your file system. If you have any optical drives plugged in, you'll see that there, and then here is your hard drive, and then below that is your account. So this is all of the account's profile data in here. There's desktop, recent, trash, so if you had anything in here you could empty your trash, documents, and one thing to note is if you hover over it, it will actually give you the exact file directory of your specific folders here. So there's music, pictures, videos, downloads, the file system. So this is going to give you basically the root level of file directories that you've got. And then there's browse network for the network section, which is going to show you anything that is on your network that could be a share of some kind. So we'll close out of that. Next up, if you right click on the desktop, it does give you a whole bunch of options. For instance, you can create launcher, create URL link, create folder, create document. If you select that, then if you have any special apps, it may give you more options. If you copied something or cut something, you can paste it here. You can open in terminal, open as root, create a link. You can search, you can open a new window, you can arrange desktop icons, and then desktop settings. So for instance, actually, if you wanted to click on desktop settings, and this is where you could go to change your desktop background if you wanted to. So for instance, we'll just double click on this one, and then as you can see, it changes the background for us. However, you can also take a look at menus, and which gives a whole bunch of different settings you can change up, and then icons, you can customize how your icons look. And then if you wanted to get into more of your settings, you can go back to the bottom left-hand corner, select applications, and then you could go to the little settings icon up here, and we can double click on this, and then this is going to give you all sorts of different settings that you can change up. I won't go into these in great detail, but as you can see, everything is pretty self-explanatory, so there's a lot of good stuff to tweak in here. And the big thing with this is just feel free to dive in and dabble. Worst case, you Swiss cheese the operating system so badly that you have to just rebuild it from scratch, and that's no big deal, but generally speaking, it's pretty hard to Swiss cheese it that badly. So that's all you need to do to get Linux Mint 22.1 Xfce Edition running. If you found this video to be useful, please like it and subscribe to my channel to keep up with my latest video happenings. I also invite you to check out my channel if you haven't done so already, as it has many interesting guides and many more to come. Anyhow, until next time, take it easy.